How the race for 2020 is already taking shape in Arizona.
People do react to the person in the White House.
Plus, gauging early impressions from voters.
Immigration is absolutely going to be important.
And the Democratic and Republican parties take early steps to come out ahead.
For too long, there was a lot of power concentrated in the hands of the few.
Resources, people are going to come into the state to help Democrats win.
Hello and welcome to Arizona 360. I'm Christopher Conover, filling in for Lorraine Rivera. Thanks for joining us. This week, we take a look at the 2020 presidential election and how it's taking shape. We're still about 20 months away from Election Day, but the races have already begun, with a crowded Democratic field forming to challenge President Donald Trump, and Democrats are lining up to take on Senator Martha McSally. For insight into these high-profile races, we turn to James Kelli, a commentator for 1030 KVOI Radio, and Jim Nitzel, the executive editor of the Tucson Weekly and Tucson Local Media. We're more than a year out. Martha McSally is running for the rest of John McCain's term. Mark Kelly and Ruben Gallego are in for the Democrats. Is this going to be a referendum race on President Trump?
In Arizona, it's not always like that. I mean, we had Republican presidents that, John McCain didn't run on George Bush's successes of his first term. Jeff Flake didn't run on the successes of George Bush in his first term for Congress. It's not really a referendum on the president. I know everybody tries to say that. I know the media likes to say that, but I don't think it is. I think when you start getting down to Senate, congressional races, you're talking about what's important to the people of that state.
I think that used to be true. I don't think it's true anymore as you watch these battles. They've been nationalized on a level that is increasing, in my opinion. I think when you look at what happened in 2018, if Hillary Clinton had been in the White House, I think Martha McSally would have very easily won that race, for example. I think people do react to the person in the White House. I think that's why Republicans had such a great run when Obama was in the White House. And I think conversely, it's why Democrats are winning for the first time in Arizona statewide because you have Donald Trump in the White House.
Does that matter, do you think, in these races, where the candidates stand with whomever is in the White House?
The Republican Party isn't John McCain's party anymore. It was. It could have been Mitt Romney's, but it isn't. It's Donald Trump's party now. So that platform is going to reflect him. And anybody running as a Republican, you're either going to reflect that platform in your own rhetoric, in your own propaganda, or you're not. And if you don't, you're going to have to deal with a very hardcore base within the Republican Party, not just Arizona, but at the county levels of every single state in the nation. If you are not supporting the Republican Party platform, the party of Donald Trump, because he's the president, it's his party now, there's going to be an issue with your own political base.
I think that's correct. I think it is Donald Trump's party now, for better or for worse, for Republicans. Where that takes them down the road remains to be seen. And I think that if you do not fall in line with Donald Trump, you are going to face that primary challenge that may knock you out. I think that's why you saw Martha McSally move from a fairly centrist candidate when she was here in southern Arizona representing CD2 in Congress to moving much more closely to Donald Trump because she was concerned about a primary challenge in that U.S. Senate race, and I think there's nowhere for her to move away from him now. I think she's saddled with that.
Martha McSally most likely won't have a serious primary. That's at least the way, again, now more than a year out is looking. But does she come in as a wounded candidate because the U.S. Senate race that she ran against Senator Sinema was so bruising?
She's not going to have a problem with a primary that she won but lost against Kristen Sinema. Her issue is going to be, can Kelli Ward, Dr. Ward, can she hold on to the amalgam that the Arizona Republican Party has created, that there has a certain amount of peace right now between the very Tea Party-ish Kelli Ward supporters and the more centrist Republicans that supported Martha McSally. Can she hold on to that amalgam? If she can't, then the Republicans have a problem. But I don't think, like I said, at that local level, that's where Martha McSally has really got to make sure, and Dr. Ward have to make sure, that coalition stays together of centrists and very conservative Tea Partiers.
Jim, what do you see as the lessons coming out of 18?
Well, you saw Kyrsten Sinema really did not embrace the Democratic title. She wasn't running as a Democrat. She was running really as an independent away from both parties. And that was very successful. For a Democrat to win a U.S. Senate seat, it hadn't happened in 30 years in Arizona. So clearly there was something magical in that formulation, as opposed to David Garcia, who got clobbered, is the Democratic candidate who went pretty far to the left. So again, I think you'll see, if Mark Kelly comes out of this, you'll see him running a very similar campaign as Kyrsten Sinema ran. I don't think you'd see Ruben Gallego run that campaign. Obviously, he's much more to the left than Mark Kelly is. The question is who comes out of that primary, and that's going to be fascinating to watch.
All right, gentlemen, let's take a break there. We'll come back to you both at the end of the show. Pollsters are getting an early sense of how voters feel about key issues and races in 2020. OH Predictive Insights surveyed voters last month about races for the Senate and President. At their offices in Phoenix, we spoke with Chief of Research Mike Noble about what their polling shows so far. U.S. Senate 2020, here we go again in Arizona. You did some polling right after Mark Kelly announced that he's running.
Yep.
He's not leading Martha McSally, but he's close behind.
Yeah, no, and we were very close to this race. So we actually polled more than anyone else in the country on the last U.S. Senate race, which was arguably the hottest race in the entire country. And now already we're seeing that in our first polling, even though it's early of the 2020 election, that this is already shaping up to be a barn burner, because you see that Mark Kelly is only 2 points, if the election were held today, is only 2 points behind current Senator Martha McSally, and Ruben Gallego is only 8 points behind Martha McSally. So it's already shaping up to be quite the contest.
Does Martha McSally get any incumbency effect, or because she was appointed and it's so short, she might as well just be a new candidate?
Yeah, so typically Senate is a 6-year term, but with her getting appointed, she is up for the next election, so she's only in there for 2 years. And so she really does not have much time, if at all, to even find the bathroom, let alone get established. So she basically definitely doesn't probably get really much of any benefit from that. If anything, it actually hurts her, because now she will then, of course, have a Senate voting record, and we see some of these controversial issues right now with whether Trump's executive order with the wall that we're currently seeing, and depending which way they go, that could be used to go after her.
Let's talk about Arizona voters. Right now, registration sits at Republicans, Independents, and Democrats in that order. Still very close in registration numbers. In 18, we saw Republican Governor Doug Ducey win. We saw Democratic Senator Kyrsten Sinema win. Obviously, Sinema had to steal some Republican votes. Ducey had to steal some Democratic votes. Yes. What do Arizona voters do?
So what you're seeing is that, last election, before that last election, every statewide office was actually held by a Republican. 5 statewide offices actually now have transferred that went to Democrats, 2 in the Corporation Commission, Secretary of State, and then Superintendent of Public Instruction and U.S. Senate. So you saw already that, and I think a lot of it was moderate Republicans or suburban, more affluent Republicans kind of defecting, and of course independents weren't really swinging Republicans' way. So now you move into a general election year where you're going to have a larger amount of independent voters come out, and a larger amount of 18 to 34 or younger folks, and folks that just typically don't vote. Usually midterms, it's the same type. It's very consistent of who comes out and votes, but we saw there was a large amount of turnout compared to what we've seen historically, and I think a lot of it too is due to social movements, social media that we're seeing, that you're seeing more folks get organized awareness through the traditional sense. So I think right now is that Republicans, if they thought they had a rough year this last election, if they didn't learn the lessons from this current one, I think they're going to be in for a rude awakening, unfortunately, come November.
President Trump right now talking a lot about immigration, a lot about the wall. How does immigration poll in Arizona as importance versus nationally? Are they similar? Are they different?
Immigration was our number one issue for a long time. However, last year, for a good portion of it, was education. And what kind of changed that around wasn't until the migrant caravan issue that came about roughly in about October, where you saw a spike in immigration as the top issue. Immigration is absolutely going to be important until the border. There is either a comprehensive immigration reform or a wall or a mixture of both. So until that point, I see it as being either the top or one of the top issues in Arizona.
All right, well, thanks for sitting down with us.
Not a problem, Chris. Thank you.
Victory at the polls can come down to how successful a candidate's party was at energizing voters on the ground. Leaders of the Arizona Democratic and Republican parties take that task very seriously and are already focused on winning in 2020. In Phoenix, we sat down with Arizona Republican Party Chairman Kelli Ward and Arizona Democratic Party Chairman Felecia Rotellini to learn more about their approaches along with the big takeaways from the 2018 midterms. We begin with Ward, a former state lawmaker who was elected to the head of the party in January, several months after a second unsuccessful primary run for U.S. Senate. When you took this job or were voted into this job, some people, I think, were surprised and called it a bit of an upset. What does it say about where the members of the Arizona Republican Party want this party to go versus where it's been?
Yeah, I think that my election to the position of chairman of the Republican Party of Arizona really is a signal of a bright new day in politics for Republicans in Arizona. For too long, there was a lot of power concentrated in the hands of the few, and I think that returning that power to the majority of Republicans is very important to the Republican electorate. They also, I think, saw in me the chance to unify the party finally. The Republican Party across the board, across the country, has had some fracturing over time, and it's time to bring it back together. We support so many of the same things. We stand up for faith and family and freedom, and we want to bring everybody into the fold. It isn't about taking away from one group to give to another. It's about spreading that out so that we all work together, we don't waste one drop of Republican talent, and we put in excellent policies. We get those policies in place at all levels of government that are going to allow the people of Arizona to prosper.
For those of us who like to read tea leaves, political tea leaves, yes. President Trump won Arizona by just under 4%. Then Senator McSally, when she was running in 18, strongly supported the president, but she lost to now Senator Sinema. Are there any tea leaves that anybody can read about the Republican Party and voters in Arizona based on all of that?
I mean, I think 2016 was an entity all to itself. It was something that many people never thought would happen, that there would ever be a President Donald J. Trump. And his election was amazing, and it energized a lot of people in the country who really had lost hope maybe towards the political process. And so we're going to continue with that momentum. And I think that one of the reasons the president was not able to be stronger in Arizona is we had two senators who were not supporting him. And both of those senators are now gone. So now we've got Senator McSally, who is with the president, and we've got a congressional delegation that is with the president, and we've got an electorate that is with the president, because when they look at their lives right now and they say, was I better off 3 years ago, or am I better off now? Almost everyone across the board is saying they are better off now and they want more of what President Trump and our Republicans across the board at the federal level and the state level have been delivering. So I think we're going to be very successful in 2020.
As we wrap this up, if you had to sum up what has to happen in 2020 for Republicans to pick up a majority in the legislature, pick up a majority in the congressional delegation again, pick up a majority in the Senate representation of Arizona. So how do you do all that?
Right. Well, we concentrate on the things that make us strong, and that is the economy and making sure that our economy is strong, that taxes are low, that people are keeping more of their own money in their pockets. That is a Republican ideal. We don't think the government can save everything. Just like Reagan said, the government isn't going to solve your problems. Sometimes bigger government is the problem. We need to shrink that down so that we have more control over our own money. We have to make sure that our communities are secure, that our states are safe, and that is border security. We're going to have to concentrate on that. As a physician, I know that the healthcare issue is going to be hot. We have to make people understand that big government healthcare means less healthcare for everyone. We want the free market to work so that people who are in the safety net get the care that they need, and people who are not inside the safety net are able to have the health care that they want, the health care that they deserve, and they don't have to wait around for a big government entity to deliver something and then expect them to be thankful for it. If we concentrate on those issues that make us strong, and we stay away from the things that are distractions that many times the media brings up or our political opposition brings up, we are going to go into 2020 very strong, and I think we're going to be unbeatable. We're going to get majorities at the state level. We're going to regain at least some of the seats in the House. I'd like to see us regain a significant amount in the House, and we're going to stay strong in the Senate.
Last thing, going back to the Senate race, right now Senator McSally is the incumbent in that, but if a Republican either comes to you or you get wind that a Republican wants to challenge her and we're going to could have a primary, do you step in and say, no, we're just going for the general, or do you let the cards fall as they may in the primary?
Right. Well, as Republicans, we do not anoint our leaders. My hope is that Senator McSally becomes so strong that no one wants to come in and take her on, that she becomes that unbeatable force that's working hand in hand with President Trump to make things happen. And I think that once that occurs, we aren't going to have any wind of primaries coming out. It isn't my job as the chairman to pick our nominees. My job is to support Republicans and make sure that we win general elections so that those great ideas that we have can be put into policy so that people out there are able to enjoy the benefits of those great Republican policies.
All right, well, thanks so much for sitting down with us.
Thanks for having me.
Shortly after speaking to Ward, Democratic Chairwoman Felecia Rotellini joined us. Rotellini ran twice for Arizona Attorney General, losing to her Republican challengers in 2010 and 2014. After Democrats scored significant wins in state and federal races last November, the party voted to keep Rotellini as its leader for another 2 years. One thing that's clear, she's kept her foot on the gas. When it comes to 2020, the two big marquee elections are the presidential election and the U.S. Senate election. Does that make it more difficult for you as head of the Democratic Party? You have to split your time, your allegiances, if you will, between the races, or is it just full speed ahead?
It's full speed ahead. And that's why we're starting so early in 2019 to make sure that we have what I'm calling the Arizona plan, the Democratic Arizona plan, where we have a base of volunteers, a base of organizers that are literally preparing for what's ahead in 2020 when we do have a robust U.S. Senate race going on and a presidential race going on, where we know funds, resources, people are going to come into the state to help Democrats win.
Let's talk about that Senate race. Right now we have one Democrat in it, Mark Kelli, running against Martha McSally. It's an interesting race, though, because even though McSally is the incumbent, she was appointed. So does that take some of the incumbency away and give you all and Mark, Kelli, if he's the only candidate, an advantage?
Since Martha McSally was rejected by the majority of voters in 2018, I have a really hard time calling her an incumbent. She was really appointed to do the will and the bidding of Mitch McConnell and the Republican far-right senators. So from our perspective, she is an easy target. She is very vulnerable. She ran a very divisive campaign.
If we look at 2018, Senator Sinema won, Governor Ducey won, both statewide races. Governor Ducey had to have pulled some Democrats. Senator Sinema had to have pulled some Republicans. How do you bring the Democrats who went for Governor Ducey home, and how do you keep those Republicans who went for Senator Sinema in that Democratic tent?
Well, you're right. The registration is close, and in the middle are independents. And to win statewide in Arizona, it's really about appealing to our independent voters, as well as Democrats and Republicans. I agree with you. Anyone who wins statewide has to have a fair amount of Republicans, Democrats, and independents voting for them, which means they have to appeal and they have to have values and messaging that matches what Arizonans care about. Right now, Democrats are the ones, in my opinion, who are much clearer in their intent and their advocacy to fight for what's important to Arizonans. Health care that's affordable and accessible, Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security, good public education that is going to make sure every kid has the opportunities that should be afforded to them. Those are Democratic values, and they're the majority values of Arizonans.
What do you do as party leader for the Democrats if in this Senate race somebody comes to you in the coming weeks and says, I want to run for U.S. Senate. I know Mark Kelly's raised more than $1 million, but I want to run for U.S. Senate and I want to run as a Democrat. Do you say, no, we can't wound ourselves with a primary, or do you just sit back and say, however the chips fall in the voters' hands?
Well, that conversation happened at lunch on Monday. I met with a gentleman who was thinking very seriously about running for the U.S. Senate until Mark Kelly got in the race. And that's what we're seeing. We're seeing folks understanding the importance and the urgency of electing a Democrat in 2020. We're seeing the fact that someone like Mark Kelly, who's a leader, who represents the values that are consistent with Arizonans and Americans and has a great shot at winning, is a veteran, military combat, and can raise money, is a candidate that's formidable. So there is a lot of natural opportunity for folks to reconsider, and that's making my job a little bit easier.
Now we have to ask, I wouldn't be doing my job if I didn't. Was that Ruben Gallego you were talking with, or somebody else?
Now, Ruben and I have had plenty of conversations, and he is a formidable candidate on his own. He is a proven winner. He has been in Congress, and those conversations with Ruben have been very different. I believe he is preparing a candidacy and will be letting us know what he's going to be doing very soon. I'm a former candidate.
Yes.
I ran in 2010. I had a very robust primary against two very beloved Democrats, one from Tucson and one from Phoenix, both with a history in Democratic politics. And the best thing I found was that a primary prepares you. A primary makes sure the media folks pay attention to the Democrats. It makes us all aware of the values, the pros and cons of a candidate, and gives us a chance to really vet those candidates. So I'm not afraid of a primary. In fact, I'm encouraging opportunities for all of our Democrats at all levels of government to get involved. And if it means they have a primary, then the best candidate will come out.
All right, thanks for sitting down with us.
It's my pleasure.
ICE, Border Patrol,
We return now to our journalist roundtable. Gentlemen, we spent the first part of our roundtable talking about the Senate race and lessons learned from 2018. Let's look at the presidential race. Will we see presidential candidates in Arizona in 2020, or are our electoral votes not going to matter, as we so often don't see them?
It's going to depend on who the Democratic candidate is, but if you look at most pollsters at this point are calling Arizona to be one of the few swing states in Arizona, I think based on 2018. So it all depends on who's at the top of the ticket to help Mark Kelly, or vice versa. Or if he's the nominee, does Mark Kelly help the Democratic nominee? Same with Martha McSally and Donald Trump. She's going to have to carry whatever baggage Donald Trump is holding at that point.
This is a time I actually agree with Jim. It will depend for the Democrats on who the top of the ticket is for the president. Will it help the top of the ticket in Arizona? But it's got to be both ways. The top of the ticket in Arizona has got to help the top of the ticket at the national level for the Democratic Party. And they're going to have to do that state by state by state. They're going to have a real strategy and not pull a Hillary and go, oh, we don't have to, campaign here or campaign there and then lose the state. So yeah, Arizona is going to be important.
Donald Trump won Arizona by a little less than 4 points. In Arizona, that's considered close for a Republican candidate. Is he in trouble in Arizona? Looking forward, I know we're not to 2020 yet, but is he in trouble?
I don't think so. I don't think so at all. As a matter of fact, I think there are more and more Democrats that are actually enjoying the fruits of Donald Trump's labors as our president. And I think they're starting to see that, and they're actually liking it. Because here's the thing, more jobs, more money into the economy also means that all of those lefty programs, all of those so-called socialist programs get more money too, because people have money to give. And that's the way, I just think that there are Democrats that actually are enjoying the fruits of his labor.
It does not appear from Donald Trump's budget that he plans to spend more money on lefty budgets. Just looking at that, it seems like he's breaking some significant campaign promises about not touching Medicare, not touching Social Security, not touching Medicaid. Whether he'll be as appealing in some of the close states that he won in 2020 remains to be seen, but I do believe Arizona will be up for grabs.
That's unfortunately one of the big things that the Democratic Party has said since Franklin D. Roosevelt. If you don't vote for a Democrat, you're going to lose your Social Security. They've been saying it in every election since the 40s. The reality of it is this: when you have more jobs, you don't need to have more social spending.
What's remarkable is that the economy is doing as well as it is, and yet Donald Trump's opinion ratings are so low, which tells me that it's not just the economy, stupid. It goes beyond that to the way that Donald Trump behaves in office, in a way that any other president would have been pretty happy with this economy and probably would have done better in the 2018 midterms than Donald Trump has done because of the way that Donald Trump behaves.
The polling I saw says he has a 52% overall approval rating, particularly on the economy. He has a 93% approval rating within the Republican Party. When he was at the 47%, you were talking just those core Republican supporters. But he's now over 50%.
What poll is this?
52%.
What poll are you talking about that has 52% approval rating? Because if you look at the average of polls, he's in the low 40s.
I think. Oh, okay. You want to average? I
want to average out the polls.
But I think
yes, absolutely.
I saw over the weekend. They were on Twitter. 52% approval rating, 93% Republican.
I don't buy that for a second.
Okay.
All right, well, we're going to leave it there. We've got time to see there's one poll that matters, and it'll be November 2020, the ultimate poll that matters, and we've got some time till that happens. Thank you both.
Thank you.
That's all for now. Thanks for joining us. To get in touch, visit us on social media and let us know what you think. Lorraine will be back next week.